Picture this. Christmas Day, surrounded by my fiancé's family. I'm literally covered in car grease, and she looks me dead in the eye, spitting out, "I'll forget you in a week." What she didn't know. I'd already been planning my escape for months. The air in that meticulously decorated living room was already thick with a tension I couldn't quite place, but her words, delivered with a smug certainty, cut through everything like a cold, sharp blade. Little did she know, every single insult she hurled that night was just cementing her own downfall, because I had receipts for everything, and I mean everything. My name is Liam. I'm 32, I fix heavy machinery, box 3 times a week, and I've been meticulously restoring a 1973 Dodge Challenger since I was 25. And yeah, that car was about to save me in ways nobody, especially Chloe, would ever expect. Chloe and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you she was the one. Back then, she was funny, ambitious, and genuinely made me want to be a better man. My mom adored her, my buddies gave their full stamp of approval, and I honestly believed we were building something real. But somewhere between picking out those fancy wedding invitations and signing vendor contracts, she started to transform into someone I barely recognized. Watching that slow, painful change over 6 months hurt more than I wanted to admit. We'd agreed to split all wedding costs 50-50ths. Seemed fair enough since we both worked full-time. But every single invoice, the venue deposit, catering, photographer's retainer, somehow ended up on my credit card. Chloe never had the money available, even though she pulled in a decent income as a marketing coordinator. She lived like someone making twice what she earned, always fresh nails, new clothes, weekend brunches at places charging $18 for avocado toast. But when it came time to pay her share of wedding expenses, suddenly she was broke. Could I just cover it? She'd pay me back next month. Next month never came. Every time I brought it up, she'd flip it, turning it into an attack on my character. She'd say I was cheap, or that I didn't truly love her if I was counting dollars. After months of that, I started feeling absolutely crazy, like maybe I was the problem. My best friend, Alex, who I've known since high school and who literally documents everything like he's preparing for the apocalypse, started keeping detailed records after I mentioned Chloe dodging a payment for the 3rd time. By November, he'd calculated I'd covered about $11,000 in wedding expenses that were supposed to be joint. On top of that, I was still paying 2/3 of our dates. Alex screenshots everything. Email chains, photographs, receipts, organizing them into color-coded folders. I used to joke he was paranoid, but that habit was about to save my future. The red flags got blindingly bright in October. Chloe started being secretive with her phone, angling the screen away, taking calls in other rooms. After 3 years, you notice when behavior changes. I mentioned it to Alex over beers, and he quietly suggested I start keeping my own records, every expense, every conversation about money, every promise she made, just in case things went sideways. So, for 8 solid weeks leading up to Christmas, that's what I did, documenting everything while trying to act completely normal on the surface. The Christmas dinner invitation came mid-December. Chloe insisted I had to be there because her mom wanted to discuss wedding details. I said, sure. Finished an early shift, spent 2 hours replacing the Challenger's front suspension because the old parts were shot, cleaned up, and headed to her parents' place around 3 p.m. The second I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house looked perfect, a tree with expensive, matching ornaments, mulled wine on the stove, holiday music, presents stacked up, but the people felt ice cold. Her mom barely looked at me. Her dad gave me a weird, tight smile. Her sister, Jane, was fidgeting with her phone, and Chloe was glued to her screen, a little smirk playing on her lips, typing away like she was live-tweeting her own ambush. We sat down for dinner, and for 20 painful minutes, everything was aggressively normal. Passing dishes, small talk about holiday shopping, her dad asking about work. But you could feel the tension building, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Jane mentioned honeymoon destinations, and Chloe's whole demeanor shifted into attack mode. She launched into this speech about how I wasn't pulling my weight financially, how I cared more about that stupid car than our future, how she was tired of being with someone without ambition who spent every free hour in a garage covered in motor oil. Her family just nodded, like they'd been briefed, like I was walking into a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Then Chloe stood up, raised her wine glass like she was making a toast, and said she was done with a man who had no drive, that she didn't need someone who lived in a garage. And then she dropped the real bomb. There are men out there who actually know what they want from life. Men like Kevin. Jane's face went white. Her dad's fork clattered. Her mom just stared into her wine. It hit me then. Her mom had known about the affair. But Jane and her dad were hearing it for the first time, just like me. But Chloe wasn't done. She yanked off the engagement ring I'd spent 2 months overtime on and threw it at me hard enough that it bounced off my chest and hit the floor with this metallic ping. She told me it was cheap, just like everything I did. And then she delivered what was supposed to be the killing blow. She looked right at me and said, "I'll forget you in a week." I've practically already forgotten you. On Christmas Day. In front of her family. She'd just nuked our 3-year relationship and announced she'd been cheating with some guy named Kevin. The wild part? I'd suspected something, but hadn't known for sure until that exact, agonizing moment. I stood up slowly, and for about 5 seconds, I felt pure, unadulterated rage. But then this weird calm washed over me. Because she'd just done exactly what Alex and I half expected. Gone nuclear. In front of witnesses. And handed me everything I needed. I bent down, picked up the ring, pulled her spare key to my apartment from my pocket, and set it on the table. I looked at her dad and said, "Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it had to end this way." Then I walked out while Chloe started yelling something I didn't even bother to listen to. I sat in my truck for 10 seconds, texted Alex, "It happened." She went full nuclear. Starting protocol now. Then I drove straight to his place while my phone exploded with texts from Chloe that went from angry to confused to panicked in 15 minutes flat. Alex opened his door, took one look at my face, and just said, "She actually did it." I nodded, and he grabbed his laptop because we both knew what came next. See, I'd spent 8 weeks preparing for exactly this. Not because I wanted it to end, but because I'd started recognizing the financial manipulation and emotional gaslighting that Alex had helped me document. Every time I'd bring up lopsided expenses, she'd attack my character. After months of that, I felt like I was losing my mind. But Alex convinced me to save everything: screenshots, bank statements, emails, voice memos, just in case things imploded and I needed proof I wasn't insane. That night, sitting in Alex's apartment while he pulled up folders of meticulously organized evidence, I felt this strange, powerful calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't confused or second-guessing myself. I could see the whole pattern in black and white. And I knew exactly what came next. The morning after Christmas, I woke up on Alex's couch with 23 missed calls from Chloe and about 50 texts that started apologetic at midnight, turned accusatory by 3 a.m., and devolved into incoherent rambling by dawn. The first thing I did was change every lock on my apartment because she'd had that spare key for 6 months. Alex was already up, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop and 3 colored highlighters lined up like surgical instruments. He looked up with grim satisfaction and said, "We have everything needed to dismantle her narrative." The plan was straightforward but thorough. Block Chloe everywhere. Update emergency contacts at work and insurance to remove her. Start systematic wedding vendor cancellations. And most critically, conduct a full financial audit of every dollar I'd spent that was supposed to be split 50/50ths. Alex had built this detailed spreadsheet breaking down every wedding expense by vendor, date, amount, and who was contractually obligated to pay what. Seeing 3 years of imbalance laid out like that was genuinely shocking, because I'd been paying in chunks and hadn't registered how incredibly lopsided it had become. The venue deposit alone was $4,500, entirely from my account. Catering was $3,200. Photographer, $1,500. Plus probably 15 smaller expenses, adding up way past my fair share. I started making calls that afternoon. Here's something useful most people don't know. Many wedding vendors have reasonable cancellation policies if you're outside certain time windows. Since our wedding wasn't until early June and this was December, I was in the refund zone. The venue gave back $3,000 of the $4,500. The caterer refunded $2,400 of $3,200. The photographer kept his retainer, as per contract. I recovered about $4,350 total. Then, 2 weeks after Christmas, just when I thought the refund process was done, the venue coordinator called, sounding uncomfortable. Apparently, Chloe had contacted them, claiming I'd stolen her identity to cancel, that she never agreed, and they'd frozen my refund pending investigation. I sat staring at my phone, processing that she was actively sabotaging my ability to recover money I'd paid. That's when I realized this wasn't a clean break. This was war. Alex showed up within 20 minutes. We spent 3 hours documenting that every payment came from my accounts, with my signatures, including emails proving I'd been the only one communicating with them. We drove to the venue the next morning, walked them through the evidence, and they unfroze the refund within an hour. But the whole thing showed me Chloe wasn't moving on. She was burning everything down on her way out. The engagement ring was trickier, since you can't return custom jewelry. But I'd worked with the jeweler, Marcus, years back, and he bought it back at 60%, putting another chunk in my pocket. As Alex and I went through shared expenses with forensic detail, we discovered Chloe had racked up $1,247 in charges that were supposed to be joint, where she'd committed to paying half but never did. The engagement party where she insisted on expensive wine, a venue tour weekend where she upgraded our hotel without asking, and other instances where she made decisions costing money, then developed amnesia about reimbursing me. Alex suggested small claims court. I hesitated, because a part of me just wanted to be done. But then I remembered her blocking my venue refund and realized she wouldn't let this end quietly. We built what Alex called the evidence Bible: bank statements, text screenshots with promises to repay, ignored Venmo requests, detailed expense breakdowns, all organized with tabs and a table of contents. The filing fee was $35. Court date scheduled for early March. Meanwhile, Chloe's behavior escalated from annoying to genuinely concerning. The apologetic Christmas texts vanished by the 27th, replaced by accusations that I'd humiliated her. By New Year's, she was sending long messages about how I'd ruined her life, how her family was disappointed, her sister wouldn't talk to her. And somehow, this was my fault for not fighting for our relationship after she'd announced her affair. She called from different numbers after I blocked her. Showed up at my gym twice until staff banned her. Drove past my apartment enough that my neighbor mentioned seeing her car. Tried getting into my workplace claiming she needed to drop something off. I documented everything: screenshots, call logs, appearance dates and times, witness statements. After the 5th incident, I called police non-emergency asking about creating an official harassment record. The officer was helpful, said my documentation was solid, and if behavior escalated, I'd have enough for a protective order. Mid-January, Alex showed up with something big. Using social media forensics, he discovered Chloe's affair wasn't recent. It had been going on for 8 months, basically since we got engaged in April. Worse, Alex found statements showing hotel rooms and weekend trips she claimed were work conferences or girls' weekends, all charged to our joint wedding expense account. She'd been funding her affair with money supposed to build our future. When Alex showed me those highlighted charges, I felt sick to my stomach. There was Napa in May, which she called a marketing conference. A beach hotel in August, supposedly a bachelorette party. A downtown hotel in September, she claimed was a late client dinner. All on our wedding card. I sat staring at those charges, and that was the closest I came to completely losing it. The financial manipulation was one thing, but this felt like calculated betrayal on an entirely different level. Alex asked if I was okay, and I couldn't answer for a full minute. Then I spent 4 hours in my garage, replacing the Challenger's brake lines, because I just needed something with clear steps and measurable progress. By midnight, I was back to being cold and focused. But something had shifted. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was going to make sure there was a complete accounting. Kevin turned out to be a mid-level sales manager, married with 2 kids, zero intention of leaving his wife despite whatever he'd promised Chloe. Alex found Kevin's wife's public Facebook, showing a normal suburban family doing soccer games and birthdays. From Chloe's increasingly unhinged social media posts, we could tell she was just realizing Kevin had used her and was never leaving his marriage. She'd blown up everything for a guy who'd been lying the whole time. Watching that realization hit her through angry posts about men being trash was almost satisfying in a dark, twisted way. Around this time, my relationship with Maya shifted into something more. She'd worked at Pete's Auto Parts for years. We'd chatted casually dozens of times, but it was just friendly shop talk. I came in for seat brackets, and she mentioned restoring a 1969 Camaro SS. We talked for 45 minutes about suspension geometry and brake conversions, and I realized I was having the first genuinely relaxed conversation in months, where I wasn't calculating who owed what or wondering if I was being manipulated. We grabbed coffee, and I talked for 45 minutes straight about vendor contracts and court preparation. Sure, I'd killed any second meetup, but Maya said she'd been through her own messy breakup where her ex tried claiming he'd paid for things she'd actually paid for, so she got it. She was straightforward, calm, knew her stuff, paid for her own coffee, and being around her felt like the exact opposite of Chloe's exhausting chaos. We started meeting at car shows. Then she helped install seats in the Challenger. And while neither of us was rushing into anything, I recognized this was what healthy looked like. Someone who showed up when they said they would, paid their own way, didn't need drama to feel alive. Chloe found out somehow. And that's when things got truly wild. There's this indoor go-kart place called Velocity Track we hit monthly. One Friday in late January, we were there for someone's birthday when Chloe showed up uninvited, clearly drunk, storming into the lobby, screaming about how I'd cheated and destroyed her life. She pointed at Maya, calling her names I won't repeat, telling everyone I'd been seeing someone behind her back, completely rewriting history. Maya just stood there, holding a socket wrench, looking utterly baffled. I was about to de-escalate when Chloe grabbed someone's helmet and threw it at the wall hard enough to crack the visor. The manager called the cops. They issued a formal trespass warning, banning her permanently, and I added everything to the evidence Bible. My phone buzzed with more messages that night, but I just screenshotted them and went back to talking carburetors with Maya while Chloe's life spiraled somewhere outside my concern. The small claims court date landed on a Tuesday morning in early March. One of those gray, late winter days where you can see her breath in the parking lot. I showed up 45 minutes early with Alex, who was carrying a briefcase that looked like it belonged to a corporate lawyer, even though we were arguing over $1,200. Chloe rolled in 10 minutes late, wearing her job interview outfit, looking tired with dark circles makeup couldn't hide, carrying just a purse, but zero documentation. When we got called in, she kept trying to make eye contact, like that would magically change the outcome. The judge was this woman, probably in her 60s, who looked like she'd seen every relationship drama variation possible and had zero patience for nonsense. She started by asking Chloe if she had any evidence disputing my claim that she owed money for shared expenses she'd agreed to split. Chloe launched into this rambling story about how the relationship was complicated and I'd always made more money, so it wasn't fair to expect equal payment when I knew she was struggling. Completely ignoring that she'd been living above her means and her struggles hadn't stopped her weekly manicures or expensive restaurant meals. The judge cut her off mid-sentence with this look of profound weariness. She asked if Chloe had any bank statements, text messages, or receipts showing she'd paid her share. When Chloe admitted she didn't bring proof because she didn't think she'd need documentation for what was obviously unfair, I watched the judge's expression shift from neutral to completely done. Alex and I presented the evidence Bible, about 40 pages, organized with tabs and highlights and a table of contents that was probably overkill, but Alex doesn't do anything halfway. The judge flipped through it for maybe 3 minutes, occasionally nodding, then looked up and ruled Chloe owed me $1,325, including the original amount plus court fees, payable within 30 days or subject to wage garnishment. Chloe's face went white, and she started to stand up to argue, but the judge just said, "Next case." And that was it. 3 months of drama, resolved in 8 minutes of court time. We walked out into the gray morning, and Alex did this little victory fist pump while I felt mostly just tired and ready to stop thinking about Chloe and actually move forward instead of just surviving her chaos. I genuinely thought that would be the end, that losing in court would make her realize she needed to move on. But apparently, humiliation is a catalyst for some people rather than a stopping point. The next 3 weeks were relatively quiet, in a way that felt ominous, like the calm before a storm you know is coming but can't see. She paid the judgment in 2 installments right before the deadline. Her social media went completely dark. Mutual friends said she'd moved back with her parents, and I started relaxing, thinking maybe this was actually over. Maya and I had been spending more time together, working on the Challenger seats I'd bought with refund money, and things felt genuinely good for the first time in years. Like I was building something real instead of surviving someone else's chaos. Then came the night of March 20th, which I remember specifically because it was the first genuinely warm evening of early spring. That magical night where winter finally breaks. Maya and I had decided to work late in my garage with the door open, installing the new upholstery we'd spent weeks picking out. It was around 10:30 p.m., and we were debating seatbelt mount routing when I heard a car pull up way too fast outside, tires screeching slightly. Before I could process what was happening, Chloe came stumbling into my garage wearing pajama pants and an oversized jacket, holding what was clearly a wine bottle, absolutely hammered to the point she could barely walk straight. She immediately started screaming at a volume that probably woke half my neighborhood. She went off about how I'd destroyed her entire life, turned her family against her, poisoned all her friends, made everyone think she was the bad guy when all she'd done was fall in love with someone else. How Kevin had blocked her, and his wife threatened her with a restraining order, and she'd lost him because of me, somehow. How she'd lost apartment deposits because the landlord found her background check showing the go-kart trespass. And somehow, in her mind, all this destruction was my fault for not being man enough to forgive her mistakes and fight for what we had. Maya just stood there, holding a socket wrench, looking completely baffled. I pulled out my phone and called 911, explaining calmly that my ex-fiancé had entered my property without permission, was clearly intoxicated, and I needed officers to respond. Chloe kept yelling about how she deserved better. How Maya was just some cheap rebound who couldn't compare to what we'd had. How I should have fought for our relationship instead of giving up easily, completely oblivious to the irony after she'd thrown a ring at me on Christmas and announced her 8-month affair to her family. The cops showed up within 8 minutes, which felt like hours, while Chloe stumbled around my garage getting dangerously close to the Challenger, making me worried she'd damage it. The responding officers handled it perfectly. They asked Chloe to step outside in a tone that left zero room for argument, performed a field sobriety test in my driveway that she failed spectacularly, checked their system, and found all the previous harassment reports, plus the go-kart trespass. Then they arrested her for criminal trespass, public intoxication, and violating conditions of her previous warning. She kept screaming my name as they put her in the patrol car with handcuffs behind her back, saying I'd regret this, and she'd never let me forget her, and I'd ruined both our lives, and a bunch of other slurred, incoherent stuff that probably didn't help her case. Then they drove away with lights on, and the street got quiet again, except for crickets and distant highway traffic. Maya looked at me, half concerned and half bewildered, and asked if that happened often. I told her no, this was actually the grand finale. The final meltdown I'd been halfway expecting for weeks. We went back inside and finished bolting down the passenger seat while I gave her the extremely abbreviated version of the past 4 months. We took the Challenger out for a test drive around midnight, just cruising through empty streets with the windows down and the engine rumbling with that deep muscle car sound that never gets old. I realized Chloe had been wrong about pretty much everything, but especially one thing. She'd said she'd forget me in a week, that she'd practically already forgotten me, standing in her parents' living room on Christmas with that smirk like she'd already won. But here we were, almost 3 months later, and she was the one who couldn't let go, who destroyed her own life trying to prove some point that didn't even make sense, who'd given up something stable for something temporary, then blamed everyone else when it fell apart. I never forgot her either, but not in the way she'd meant it as some threat. I remembered her as a lesson about red flags and financial boundaries and the importance of having friends like Alex who document everything and tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. The Challenger ran like a dream with the new seats, comfortable as hell. Maya and I grabbed breakfast at some 24-hour diner and talked about upgrading the brake system. And somewhere across town, Chloe was dealing with the consequences of her own choices, which honestly had nothing to do with me anymore. She'd wanted to be unforgettable, wanted to be the one who walked away and moved on to something better. But instead, she became exactly what she'd accused me of being, forgettable, irrelevant, and stuck in the past while everyone else moved forward. So, what do you all think? Have you ever dealt with someone who just couldn't let go? Share your experiences, or tell me if you think I handled this right, down in the comments below.